so welcome everyone. Today is our Generate version 5.3 office hour. Just a quick reminder. Johnny here in a few minutes is going to do some demo of some new features and tools that came out with 5.3. And in order to incorporate the questions and the demo and kind of the look into all of it, we are extending these office hours to a full hour. So in the past, it's been 30 minutes. So today will be an hour, just an FYI. If there's something that if someone needs to drop off and there's something you need to follow up on, you can always email one of us presenters and let us know. And I think that there will also be, oh yeah, everything is being recorded as well. So you'll have access to that. Okay, do the next slide, Travis. Perfect, thank you. Okay, so our agenda for today, we will be looking at the changes that were included in Generate 5.3. That will include that the demo of a few different tools and items that the team created for this release. We will get a quick preview of 6.0, look at our release calendar coming up, and then open it up for open discussion. Obviously, if you have questions in the meantime, feel free to unmute yourselves and we can discuss on the spot if we need to do that as well. And then at the end, we will present the session feedback survey so that you can provide any feedback that you have on the office hours, anything you would like to see different, anything that you liked. As you all know, the survey is really helpful to us in kind of molding this session to be more helpful to you all. Johnny, you want to take it over?
Sure, thank you. Hello, my name is Johnny Cunningham. I am an ETL developer for the Generate project. For those of you who have been here before, you can see we've updated the slides, updated the presentation. Unfortunately, you're stuck with the same old presenter. So 5.3 was a smaller release. So the changes are listed here, the major changes, and then we've got the ones that are not file specific that we'll talk about. But for child count, so for 002089, we had an instance come up in a state, we hadn't had it before, where they had a student that was actually assigned to a school that was closed. And we realized that we did not have that check in our logic. So we added that to the child count logic. So if that occurrence does happen, if a student comes in that's assigned to a closed, inactive, or future school, they would be excluded. And then we talked about this briefly in the last one, but we also added some better handling of multiple race records with our new staging to RDS migration. And then discipline, we added that same logic to discipline. We didn't have any other discipline changes, but for the 6 discipline files, we have 2 sorry, it doesn't apply to 144. And then 88 should be listed in there as well. So I missed one and I apologize. But for the discipline files, we added that same logic. And then for directory for 29, we retired the chief state school officer contact information per ed. And then this one, we realized we modified the code so that it now goes staging directly to the RDS. But in the report logic in the UI, when you go to pull the report, if you're familiar with pulling it in Generate, there is an LEA dropdown and a school dropdown when you drill down to those levels. It was actually trying to pull from an IDS table. So it was expecting the migration to have gone through the IDS to the RDS. So the first time you went to directory, if you had not run anything else through the IDS, that list would come up empty. So we modified the logic. It now pulls from the dimension table. So it matches up with the new staging to RDS code. And then for 39, for grades offered, basically you see 2 bullet points there, but we really just refined the logic for no grades versus ungraded in a couple of different circumstances. In working with One of our states specifically, they had an instance where they had a question about how this was determined. So we went back, talked to Ed about it, looked at our logic and refined that logic. So I think we're handling it appropriately now. And then the last was, the last file specific one was for 190 and 196, which is the Charter Authorizer Directory and the Management Organizations Directory. The metadata was missing for those two files, so we've got a couple of states that are working on those. So we had to add the metadata, and that was the second piece down there. With the metadata missing, it was causing error if you tried to run it. So those were the file-specific changes. We added the year-to-year child count report in the reports library. So we just put the little screenshot on here if you haven't gone to look at some of these things yet. So if you go to standard reports library, you'll see that set of reports. We worked out year-to-year child count. It is now available, along with, I think in the previous release was the year-to-year exiting and year-to-year discipline removals. I may not have those names exactly right, but those two reports were fixed in the previous release, so we got child count done in this one. Okay, so then the general changes, and this is where we're going to spend a little bit of time later in the presentation. The first one, we internally decided on a naming convention for the source to staging ETL because we're working on trying to incorporate to make the migration process a little more streamlined, a little easier. And in order to do that, the code as we write it would need to know what that ETL is called that actually takes the data from the SEA source into the staging table. So we came up with a standard name. We haven't done anything with it yet, so it says there it will be leveraged in future development. There's nothing you have to do. There's nothing you have to change. I just want to make that clear. In future versions of Generate, as we work that into our logic, then we may just go into like the ETLs that are already built, that you've already built, and just modify the names of those to the new standard. That would be the only change. But again, that's in the future. That was just something we decided internally. For this release, we created a new schema called utilities. And we have some tools that are available in Generate. We're going to go over those in a little bit in a little more detail, but we wanted to segregate those and put them in an easy to find location so that as you're working through Generate, if you need to leverage any of those things, you know, they should be very easy to find, well organized, hopefully. The big tool that was released as part of 5.3 is the submission file comparison utility. We'll go over that in detail in the demo. And then we took some of the other tools that we had kind of scattered throughout the database and we pulled those into utilities. We automated our end-to-end testing scripts. So as we're working on a file or new files, or as we make changes to a file, we have end-to-end tests that we write, and then we try to keep those tests updated, with the most recent set of changes. And then we can run those to do regression testing, to test all of our new scenarios as we get new things. But what we wanted to do was build that into so where it runs automatically. So little peek under the covers. The way it works when we're working on a ticket, we submit that ticket. Once it's reviewed, goes through all the code review process, then goes through the QA process. It gets merged into our main branch of code. When that happens, it automatically kicks off a build, which pushes all of that code to our test server. So we now have a process that overnight, it automatically runs all of the end-to-end tests, produces all the results for us, so that every day we can look and see if anything that we did the previous day, if we didn't catch it in our review or QA process, those tests will help us find any issues that we need to look into. And now it's automated, so it runs automatically. We don't have to remember to run it. The adjusted debug tables for the year-to-year comparison reports was actually a bug. My fault because I wrote that code. So we have debug tables, which I'm going to discuss in a little more detail as we go into the demo. But they are geared toward obviously the EDFACS reports. And when we started adding the year-to-year reports into the reports library, they run through the same code. So they were hitting the debug tables and it was trying to create debug entries for year-to-year reports, which they're not built the same way, obviously. So there was a bug in there and we fixed that. And then the last one down there, we'll also go into a little more detail in a few minutes, but we created common debugging views, staging and RDS that hopefully will help as you're building your ETL, testing that ETL, working through migrations to give you a quick way to view that data in those two environments. And we built it for child count in 5.3. We already had it in, I think it was 5.1 or 5.2. We had exiting and discipline and staff. So, but we'll look at those in a little more detail as well. And so this is where we're going to go into the demo part. Before we do that, does anybody have any questions? I want to give you an opportunity because I know I tend to speed up talking. Anybody have any questions or anything you want to ask before we do sort of the demo? You can add it in chat as well if you don't want to come off mute. Okay. And thank you, Travis. I had Travis mute everyone and mute the chat, so I never have to answer a question. So thank you, Travis. Okay, so now we're going to do some demo stuff. And feel free to ask questions at this point, break in, stop me. I'm going to go into as much detail as I think you might need. But if you want to ask questions about it, obviously just stop me and we can talk about something in more detail. The big one as part of the 5.3 release, again, was our submission file comparison utility. And slow down so I said it right. And basically what this is as you're working on a new file, or maybe you're in you submitted last year or you worked on it a lot last year, and this is the year you're hoping to submit. If you're still running your legacy process as a comparison, that's where this comes in handy. So it could be that you're into your second year, or it's a brand new file you're working on, whichever of those circumstances you're in. What we end up doing is we take your legacy submission file that you create out of your process, we take the generate file that's created out of generate, and then we just match those up line for line through all the category sets, through all the levels, depending on the file we're looking at. And then it'll show you where there's differences. So you can go look and research those and figure out, what the difference is and why there is a difference between your process and generate. That used to be a very, very manual process. So this is now, it automates almost all of it. So for 5.3,
Johnny, real quick, Shauna asked if you can zoom in a little. I don't know if you can.
Yes.
And I think, Shauna, you can too. I think there's a way for you to do it.
Let me do that.
On your keypad.
So let me ask, is that big enough? Or do you want me to go bigger?
Control plus. Thanks, Travis.
If anybody wants it bigger than that, I can go bigger as well with what I'm sharing. Good. Okay. So again, what this does is automate the process that used to be manual, right? So the two things, really what I was going to say first. With 5.3, this is the first version of this utility. There's going to be a few things I describe here that we're also working on automating. So hopefully this is going to be a fully automated process in a future version of this utility, and hopefully not in the distant future, very near future. So currently, this would be the process with the utility, right? So you would have your legacy file that you created out of your process. You would migrate the data through generate, create a generate submission file, which gets downloaded onto your machine. You would take those two files, put them in a location that the generate server can see. And then at that point, one other thing. In those files, you just have to go in and manually remove the headers. because that header row, obviously it's trying to, the code is trying to read through all the columns, and what it's expecting to see in those columns in the header row is different. You don't have to remove the header rows. I found that out as I was playing with it. You just get the first two rows in your comparison are really, really ugly. You could just ignore those two. Or if you remove the header rows, then you get this nice clean comparison. Either way. But so you would get your two submission files, put them in a location, and then you would run this stored procedure. And I think on the slide back in the slideshow, we have documentation for this. So you can click that link and it'll take you to the documentation that explains this entire process in a lot more detail as well. It's got screenshots of things. It also has like example code so you can see how to run it, which we're also going to do here. But so if you need that documentation to refer to, it's in the slide. But in the stored procedure itself, it also helps by showing you in the commented code here what's expected in each of the variables when you call this stored procedure. Okay, I'm not going to go into the stored procedure itself. It's just dynamic SQL, but this is it. So let me pretend I hadn't run it already. So I've got my two files. I put mine in ctemp. I was super creative. So this may be something that if you're going to be using this long term, you might want to create a path. You might want to have C generate file comparison legacy, and then you put all your legacy files in one, you put all your generate files in, same path, generate. However you want to structure this to maintain it and for it to make sense in your environment. For me, I just needed to get them onto my machine so that I could test this. So the database name, really quickly, is your database, whatever you have. So in most cases, it's either going to be generate or generate-test. If you have something else, I mean, if when you first installed generate, if you called it something different, that's fine. Or if you've created additional, databases that you're running these comparisons against, just this is what database name is. If you leave it null, it defaults to generate. And then schema name, I put staging, which is not good, but this is the schema that you want it to put the results of your comparison in. So it's going to create a table with the comparison data. Where do you want it to put that data? We recommend, and in most of the states that we work in, like doing intensive TA, we create a schema for the state, like the 2-digit state code. Because there are some things that we do that we want to segregate away from generate, like uploading your legacy submission files, right? Those don't need to be in the generate structure when you're trying to look for stuff and you've got all these odd table names and things like that. So we recommend creating like the 2-digit state, creating that as a schema, and we can use that. If you don't want to do that and you want to create a different schema name, that's fine. The one caveat with this is, though, when you run this utility, that schema has to already exist. It's not going to create the schema for you if it doesn't exist. You're just going to get an error. So I put it in staging because I was originally working on our test server and I didn't want to actually make schema changes in our test server. I moved it to my local. So in my local I could have, but I forgot. So I apologize. Submission year is the submission year you're working on, file level, the path to the files, and then file type. There's CSV and tab, those two. If you leave this null, it defaults to tab. So it depends on the file format of the files that you're uploading. And then show SQL, this last one, for those of you that like to look at it, you can actually set that to 1, and it will output the dynamic SQL that gets created. So the insert statements, the drop tables, the populate tables, all of the stuff that's going to happen. Just be aware, it does not actually execute it. Right, so you're just looking at what gets created, basically. If you set this to 1, show SQL, yes. So when you actually want to run it, you need to set it to 0. So We will do that now. I took the header out of these two files and then put those files in that location. Sorry, turn that off. Although it was good right at that moment. So you'll get these little informational messages at the bottom. It will tell you that your results are located in table, right? So this piece here, and I apologize, I can't make the results window bigger. Oh, that's not what I want. I want that. So you can take that table name. Apparently it didn't copy it. Let me do it again. And then run that select, and you get the results of the comparison of those two files. Now this one is going to have a large variance because for our testing, we have you may have heard us refer to it before, called Hydrate. We have a tool that creates randomized test data for us, randomized students, randomizes their statistics. So what I did is I ran Hydrate to create a set of students, ran them through for child count, then had Hydrate create a second set of test students and ran them through for Hydrate. And that's what I'm pretending to be my legacy in my generate file. So there are going to be significant differences in this one. I would not anticipate you're going to have 2,816 variance rows when we run this in your environment. But you can see here, basically, you're going to get, I ran it at the SEA level. So I get the categories. So LEP, not LEP. And then I get the totals for those two. And you can see the difference between the two. And then it goes through each of the education environments. It goes through age plus education environment, every possible code set, every possible combination of values that has a variance. So then we can use this to then, figure out these variances, where the difference is between the legacy process and the generate process. And like I said, the two manual pieces now are you have to remove the header from the file, and then you have to create the file in generate and copy it down, copy it to these locations. We're working on automating the removal of the header or ignoring the header in the file. We're not going to remove it, but ignoring the header in the file. And then also not having to create a generate submission file, but it running against the generate report table. So it'll make two of those steps automated that are currently manual. Does anybody have any questions about this specific utility? Any more detail?
This is Nathan, and I think as a generate team member, I think I know the answer to these, but curious, I had to step away. Did you mention the BCP, the utility of BCP in this?
Oh, no, sorry. This uses bulk insert. So it's going to take your legacy file, the generate file, and it uses the bulk insert utility to put the data, to move the data up to generate. If that is turned off in your instance, in your SQL Server instance, you can just manually upload the files into those tables, and then the rest of this would be automated. Sorry. Thank you, Nathan.
And then a follow-up to that, the output of the comparison table, does it show the everything or just where there's a mismatch?
This shows where there is a mismatch. Because otherwise you'd have to sort through it. The ones that already match, we're good with those. So we really need to investigate the ones where we got a difference between the legacy process and generate process. So currently this is going to display the variances, the variance rows.
So the
And that's
goal
why I
is,
said I wouldn't expect you to see this many.
so the goal is to get to no records in this table.
Right. And as you can see, like this process, once you've set it up, your legacy process is your legacy file is constant. The only thing you would have to do if you were going to run this, you were going to do the comparison multiple times, is you would obviously have modified something in your ETL potentially or in the source data, and then rerun the migrations. You'd have to recreate the generate submission file, put it in this location with the new name, and then just change this name to whatever the new file was named. So again, that'll be a lot easier when we can automate that piece, because then you won't have to do that every time. All you would have to do is just remigrate the data with whatever changes you made, and then just rerun this utility. There wouldn't be any other manual steps to do. I think there was a question. I saw it pop up. See, I see a brief thing pop up.
So Johnny, the first one is from Swetha. She's saying, wondering for the end-to-end testing, automated testing, parts of the general changes, is data-based or system-based by database testing? I mean, testing that uses real data to simulate the types of scenarios that the tool will encounter in production. By system-based testing, I mean testing that focuses on underlying code and the functionality of the tool itself.
Thank you, Shweta. So what we're testing in this case is both really. So our hydrate data that I mentioned is randomized, but we have the ability to modify how it randomizes data first, and then we can also manually add test records. So as we're working in states, and this is where this partnership is invaluable to us, as we're working with you guys, and because each of you have unique data situations that we run into as we start working on different files, if we come across a scenario where we find, oh, well, Generate didn't handle this correctly, or we've got to verify this code, or sometimes, like I mentioned, with the no grades versus ungraded, where we have to go back to Ed and ask for some clarification on how they want that data reported. Any of those circumstances, we go in and create test records for that criteria, so that Generate now is being tested for everything we find in a state, so that hopefully we would never have the same bug twice, right? Every time if a state, if we encounter a unique situation in a state and we now have test data to test that, then that state obviously would never have that problem, but neither would any other state who happens to have that data situation. So the way the tests work is we have our hydrate system that creates all the test data, and then we have all of the test records that we manually create. If we can't manipulate hydrate easily to make it create the scenario we want, then we just add a manual test record that meets the criteria. So we would load all of that data into our staging tables, run the migration, and then we run the test, which actually compares staging to the report. So the very beginning of the process to the very end of the process. And what we do is we take all of the logic that the report uses to aggregate students, and we apply it to the test, to the staging environment. And by doing that, we should be able to match 1 for 1, right? We should be able to say we've got, 4,000 students that meet this specific criteria, and in the report we ended up with 4,000 aggregated for that specific circumstance. So we're testing both. We're testing specific data, student data, as we enter that, or as Hydrate randomizes it, but we're also testing the migration process. So we're doing both, Shweta, if that answers your question.
Yes, we're essentially double. Sorry, go ahead. Didn't interrupt.
Oh, no, nothing much. I was saying thank you for answering that, Johnny.
Sure.
So in essence, we're doing like a double check. We're double checking our work. So we run all the ETL. So that ETL is really what's under test here, right? The movement of the data from staging into the RDS, from the RDS into the report tables, all that code is what's under test. And we're recreating the logic to produce those numbers on the staging environment. So when we run our tests, we're really testing if there's any variance. It could either be an issue with the test, or it could be an issue with the process somewhere. So we're really by running into any issues with the outcomes of the tests, we're verifying the logic in the process, and we're verifying the test itself. And those are what are run on a nightly basis. I think you had another question as well about the utility schema.
Yes, I was just wondering, is the utility schema internally by the database level, or it is also exposed to the user interface, the generate application?
Currently, it is only available through the database. That is something we're looking at. So a lot of the things that we've developed are things that we realized the file comparison utility, the upload of the files into Generate, being able to do some of the other stuff we're going to look at in the other utilities. But UI development for those things takes a little bit longer. So rather than waiting until we had the availability to do that work, we figured we can create them as SQL utilities to begin with. That way they're available to you, you can use them, and then we're slowly going to incorporate all of these into the UI as we can. So right now they are available database level through SQL, but they will be available in the UI as we can work them all in.
Okay.
Good question. Thank you for asking.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just curious, like we have users who work only at the application level, and we have users who work at the database level as well as application level. So I was just curious, like if that will be exposed to the application level, that would be great.
It will be, but it's not right now.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ultimately we'd like to have all of this stuff in the UI. We have, Nathan can tell you, we geek out on this quite a bit. There's lots of things that we see that we would like to add to the UI, so for usability, to make it easier for you to do the work you do every day. So yeah, the ultimate plan is all of this stuff's going to be available in the UI. It's just going to take us a little while to get it all there.
Right, and that includes the file upload. So Lisa, we see you had a question about the accessibility. I believe the file does need to be on the server because the BCP command uses. I believe that's the case, right, Johnny? Do you have to be on the server? I think it has. The server itself has to have file level access to read.
Right. Yes.
But long term, we'll have a user interface that does all this for you. So we will remove the need for BCP because a lot of states will disable BCP. The long term, we'll actually do the load through Angular and .NET, which means we won't have any restrictions. You'll just have a file upload field inside of the Generate user interface. You select your file you want to compare. It'll upload it, and then we'll have a nice, pretty user interface that shows you, highlights all the where there are differences between those files. But that's the longer term, more intensive. This is we knew we wanted to get this feature out there, so it makes your life a lot easier when doing this comparison. And this is what we could do with the available time and resources.
Any additional questions before we move on to some of the other tools? Or did I miss any, Liz?
Nope, that's everything in the chat.
Okay. So this, and I thank you, Shweta, because I completely forgot. I scrolled down. This is the new utility schema, and these are the things that are currently in it. So there are 3 or 4 of these that are part of the file submission comparison utility. So these are all not new tools. Part of this is the group of stored procedures that do that work. And you'll see also there is some, like there are very specific ones in here called like C029, because directory, if you think about it, right, is actually a field by field comparison. You need to compare every single field in the legacy to every single field in the generate file. Whereas when you're looking at like a student level file for child count, for instance, what you're looking at comparing is by this group of category sets, I'm only comparing one field. I'm comparing student count, right? So they're different types of comparisons. So we have different specific stored procedures that do that. You still only have to run the one. You just put in what it is, the file that you're trying to go to, and then it will appropriately call the stored procedure set that it needs to call. The other things that are in here are smaller little utilities that you may or may not use. You may have a need for them and use them, but I wanted to show you, this is why I said we had some of these things in Generate for a while. I don't know that, I know I did a poor job of highlighting these things in the states that I'm in, but this is an opportunity to show you that they're out there just in case you have a need for them. So we have a pair
Oh, Johnny,
of,
real quick,
oh,
hold
sure.
on, sorry. Shona had a question. Could we manually upload the tables to our schema if we can't add to the server?
Manually, do you mean in the file comparison utility? If that's what you mean, yes, you can. You would have to if you can't use the BCP utility.
Okay, yeah, she said yes.
Did that answer your question? Sorry. Okay. So this pair is disable and rebuild indexes. I'm just going to do them, together. So if you're not familiar, on the database, indexes speed up queries, inserts, updates, deletes. We don't do deletes, but it speeds up, makes those more efficient. So we have indexes on all of the staging tables, right? The staging environment tables. But over time, as you keep hitting those indexes, right, they can become more and more fragmented, which means they get less and less efficient. It can actually cross over to a point where having an index in there makes the query less efficient than if you didn't have an index at all. So disabling them and rebuilding them occasionally just keeps them clean and as efficient as possible. So we have utilities in here that do that for you. You can run those, at whatever interval you feel like, if you want to wait as you're seeing performance issues, or if you just want to build it into your process that it runs these, but these utilities are out there for you. We have one called Cleanup Debug Tables. I'm going to come back to that one in a second. We have cleanup grades offered, which because we had a state that had this circumstance, they had loaded their data, loaded their organization data with grades offered. So all that data flowed through. It ended up in the fact and dimension tables. And then they realized the source data for grades offered was incorrect, but there was no automated way to remove that grades offered, that invalid grades offered data. So this utility will do that for you. It gives you a couple different ways to do it. You can pass in the organization identifier. So if you need to remove it from a specific organization, you can pass in the type. So you can say, this is the identifier, this is an LEA. I need to remove it from the LEA level or the school level. You can remove a specific grade or grades. You can remove by a specific school year. And it's got examples down here of calling the stored procedure. But just in case, if you ever ended up with, if grades offered data that was inaccurate or wrong, you could remove it and then remigrate your data. Or if removing it fixes it, then you're done. I'm going to come back to that one too. So clean up debug tables. I want to make sure everybody's aware that these exist. So really quickly, for those of you that we've worked with doing intensive TA, if you've been with Generate for a while, this is a process you are very familiar with. If you're new to Generate or newer to Generate, the basic idea is, right, say you're going to start with child count. So you're going to work on at the very beginning, like, okay, I've got to figure out where all my data is, or if it's in a snapshot table, wherever the source data is going to come from. You build an ETL that pulls that data into staging. Then you run the migrations, and then you need to match that data. All of that up to the matching of the data was pretty well automated, other than the building of the ETL. Of course, that's going to be a state-by-state thing. But up to the matching of the data, then it became really manual, right? So we've been trying to add as much utility as we can to make that process faster, easier, less of a headache. So that's where you can see a lot of these tools are geared toward, once you've migrated your data in, doing that comparison so you can quickly refine the generate data down to where you have a submission file you're confident in that matches what you're expecting it to be, and you can submit that file, quickly and more confidently. So the file comparison utility helps with that. One of the other things we added a few releases ago, but again, I don't think, I'm going to say because I know I didn't promote this as well as we probably should have. But we created debug tables. If you're not familiar with those, or if you're new to Generate, this will be a good time to see them. When you're doing matching work, right? So we looked at that file comparison utility and it told me, with this set of categories, I had a number from my legacy file, say, 586. And then the generate number was 572. Okay, that's great. But now what do I do with that, right? I know there's a variance. What do I do with it? The first thing we need to do is identify the students that make up the difference, right? So I don't even remember what my numbers were, but I think it was 14 maybe. I'm going to hate to go back and look at that later. But you're going to want to find those 14 students that are different between the two aggregated counts, right? And if you can identify the 14, then you can go look at their data specifically and figure out why. Either they were included or weren't, whichever side the variance falls on. So on the generate side, we needed a way to quickly identify the students that make up the counts, to make up those aggregated counts. So we created a process that creates these debug tables. Sorry, I hate scrolling, but I got to get down here. So this gives you an idea here. These are the debug tables. They get created automatically. They are dropped and overwritten every time you run a migration. So it doesn't store previous versions of a table. It just overwrites the existing table if you've already run that migration one time before. And again, it's automatic. It's part of a migration. You don't have to do anything. These are going to get put out there. And you can see, based on the file, is how many tables you're going to get, right? So you're going to get the file at every level that file is reported, and for every category set that file is reported. So depending on, what that is for a particular file, like for instance, for C002, you're going to have lots of tables out here. For like 144, for instance, for discipline, you're going to have a very small number of tables. But anyway, so you can see these tables get created, and you can see I've run them multiple years and I should use the cleanup utility, but I haven't yet. So it creates the file number, the level, the category set, and this is all of those, whether it's a category set, a subtotal, or a total. It creates one for all of those. The year, and then it uses these abbreviations, but we put these on there because if you are not familiar with the category sets, which as much as I've been working with C002 over the last 3 or 4 years, I can't remember these. But it just gives you an abbreviation of what makes up that category set, right? So this is age and education environment. These are not the greatest abbreviations. They're used in our code, but they're easily decipherable, just to give you an idea quickly of what makes up that particular category set. Anyway, these tables, basically, as we're running the migration and we're about to create the aggregations, at that step in the process, we write out all of the student IDs and the relevant data for that particular category set to these tables that make up that aggregated number. So when you look at a generate report, whether you're looking at it in the UI or you're looking at it in a SQL table, or you're looking at it in the file comparison utility, you can look at that number, go to this debug table, and see the students that make up that number. So you can quickly identify the students that make up the generate number. If you can replicate that process with your legacy file, then you have both sets of students. Then you just do the comparison real quick to find the difference. And then you can quickly work on your matching issues. So these debug tables exist out here. Again, You don't have to do anything. They get created automatically. And you can see, depending on how many migrations you run, you're going to get a bunch of them, which is the reason for the utility, right? So we have a cleanup debug tables utility, which is just, again, we tried to make it a little more flexible depending on what you need to do. You can pass in report code, report year, or both. So you can remove everything for a report code if you want to. You can remove everything for an entire year. So like, obviously you saw I had 2021 data in there. If I didn't want that anymore, I could run this utility for 2021 and it would remove all of the debug tables for that year. Or you can combine it if you really want to be more targeted and say, I just want to remove C002 for 2021, and it would do that. So this utility exists out there just to help you clean that up, because again, it can get pretty big as you start working on more and more files and you're running more and more migrations. And I think
Johnny,
Lisa had a question
Lisa
about
has a
documentation.
question. Yeah, exactly. And I'm wondering if it's a good point to kind of transfer into the GitBook slide. But Lisa's question was, is there documentation for the cleanup utilities beyond what's in the stored procedure?
The bigger utilities, and I can stop sharing and go back to the presentation, or Travis, if you can take it back. I can just stop. I think it'll go back then. Oh, unfortunately, it went to me. But the bigger utilities that we've written, like the file comparison things, we've created documentation for those. For the smaller things like the cleanup debug tables and cleanup grades offered, we have not created an actual formal document for them. So currently the documentation, we tried our best to document the stored procedure itself as good as we could. But we are going to create documentation for all of these utilities. Travis, I think there was a slide for GitBook in there. Sorry, I know I'm jumping around in the process. Sorry. So we have a new method for documenting generate, a new location to document generate, sorry, called GitBook. And it is going to have, it already, and I'm saying this because other people did a ton of work on this. I can't take any of that. They did a huge amount of work to get this up and going and to get all of that data in there that we have that's currently available, and we're adding more to it. But Lisa, to your question, so we're going to post documentation here, and the benefit of putting it here is going to be, obviously it's going to be publicly available, but documents will link to other documents. If there's something in a document that references something, you'll be able to quickly just link to that document and look through it, or if there's a demo of it or something like that. We're going to be able to it'll be searchable, so you'll be able to navigate and search for things that you need. It's going to have navigation on the left like you would expect to see in documentation. So I think GitBook's going to be a lot easier to get to the thing you need quickly. And again, if you're following a process and maybe that process spans a few documents, they'll link. So you can just, okay, I'm familiar with this piece, let me go to the next one, and you just link through a process if it's a longer process, things like that. So yes, some documentation is already up on GitBook, but we're adding more, and we're looking at the current documentation that we have and, merging it into GitBook. So it will be available. But those smaller utilities, Lisa, to your original question, we don't have formal documentation for them yet. They are just documented in the stored procedure. Does that answer your question?
Hi, Johnny.
Yes.
Yes.
One quick thing I'd like to add with the GitBook is that for each page, if you're looking at it, you'll see at the very bottom a "was this page helpful" little doodad, and that just gives us the feedback we need to know if that page was helpful. So you can give us a frowny face, an okay face, and a happy face, and then we were able to track that and then know which pages we need to go into and work on. So we'd love to get all of your feedback on that as you're looking through this. So that was it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry. Did you say it was available, or you're waiting on something to be available?
GitBook is actually available. All the documentation that we have is not currently there yet, but it
Okay.
is open and available. There is some documentation already there.
All right, thank you.
And huge thank you to Travis because he put a ton of work into that. So we've got about 8 or 9 minutes left. So quickly, I want to show you one other thing that's not part of utilities. And then we can do these last two because I want to make sure we touch on this one. This is not in utilities, but we added it in 5.2, I believe. Staging validation code. It's the second one on our demo of new tools there, and it has its own documentation as well. This one, basically what this is really quickly, because I know we've got a couple more slides to get through here, and we want to have time for the last questions and the evaluation. What this does is once you've loaded your staging data for any file that you're working on, you can run our new staging validation process, and we have rules that we set up that we can do by file group, like all of child count, so both 2 and 89, or like all of discipline, so all 7 of the discipline files, or we can do one that is very specific to a file, right? Like this rule only applies to 005, for instance, in discipline or something like that. But we have all of these rules written, and I wanted to show you this real quick. So this little block here, you can run this manually. Obviously, you wouldn't have to do the begin, try, and catch and all that stuff if you didn't want to. Or you can take this like a little chunk of code like this and add it to your ETL that you currently have written that goes from source to staging. So you could do all of your migration, all of your work that pulls that data in, does all of that work, distributes it into the appropriate staging tables. And then at the bottom of that, you could add this little block of code and it would run the staging validation rules. So I'm just going to demo this really quickly because I want you to be able to see it. You can see what this does. So I'm hoping here. Oh, sorry. I forgot I stopped sharing. Thank you, John. So the mystery block of code that I was referring to that nobody could see is this on screen. So there is a staging.validate staging data stored procedure that will, when you pass in the year and the domain or the file number, whatever it is you're trying to run, whatever set of rules you want to run, it will execute all of those rules, and then you can execute the stored procedure that shows you the results. So you could take this little block of code exactly as it is and just drop it into your existing ETL code that you have and just modify the parameters. And you get results like this. I'm not going to go into huge detail because we're running short on time, but it will show you all of the rules, anything that did not pass a rule. It shows you the severity level of that particular rule. Like an error would mean whatever this is going to cause a problem in the final report, right? Something like that. It shows you how many records failed that particular validation. And then even better, it gives you the SQL that you can execute to identify those records. So like this 43 records, I could just take this SQL, copy it out, run it, and I would get the 43 records that failed that validation. So I want to make sure everyone is aware that this tool is available. It's not in the utility schema because it really is part of a migration. But anyway, sorry, because I know we're running short. So Travis, I'm going to quit sharing if we can go back to the presentation. So preview of Generate version 6, which is going to be due out the end of summer-ish. We are going to be putting in the CEDS data warehouse version 10 changes. We're going to catch Generate up to the newest version of the data warehouse. We have the updates for assessments for all of you that do this stuff. You know, the assessments files changed this year, so we're going to be doing that. I think there's a comment that says, no, I'm still good. Okay.
I can hear you.
Okay. And then the last thing is we have a few more of the year-to-year reports that we're going to open up as well in the standard reports.
Can you advance the slides to maybe a version 6 slide, I'm thinking, because we're on the slide 1.
Oh, I see the
Yeah, I
preview
see
generate
version
6.0 slide.
6.
Oh, mine's not. Okay, whatever.
So that's all I had for the preview of generate 6.0. Since we kind of got out of sync there, does anybody have any questions? Because I was talking about things that you weren't seeing yet and some of you weren't hearing me. Do you have any questions really quickly? And I apologize for that. I tend to be a magnet for mistakes.
So can you all see the release calendar now? Okay, perfect. Okay, so as you all know, we released 5.2 in December, 5.3 in February. So like Johnny just said, we are in progress for 6.0 and are planning on releasing that in August. I'm gonna go to the next slide, Travis. We already did that. Yep. I think we can go past that. And I think this is our last slide. Just like I said at the beginning of the call, if you could just take this 2-minute evaluation, it's really helpful for us in terms of planning and kind of strategizing around what's helpful for you all. So anything that you would like to see different, anything that you like. Again, it's just really helpful for our planning efforts around these calls. Anything else? Does anyone else on the CIID team have anything to say? Lisa wants to know when the slides will be available, Travis.
We can get the slides up probably later today or tomorrow. I'll send them out to you. Out to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thanks, Johnny, for doing a deep dive demo there. That was great.
All right, well, I think that's everything we have. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz. I'm going to drop the eval link one more time and thank people for taking it. Otherwise, take care, everyone.